Welcome back to another episode of A Gift from Adversity. My name is Juri Love. Today we are recording episode 146. Before I introduce our guest, I want to introduce my book, which is the same title as this podcast, A Gift from Adversity. The subtitle of this book is Overcoming Sexual Abuse, Domestic Violence, Bullying, and Homelessness. After I wrote this book, I got a lot of messages from all over the world, people sharing their adversities. And I felt very compelled to start this platform that people can not only talk about the adversity, but the tools that they use to overcome and a gift that came from it. And I'm very grateful to have many wonderful guests from all over the world. So let's invite today's guest. Hello, how are you doing?
Hi, Juri. I'm good. How are you?
Good. So can you tell our audience your name, where you're coming in from, and if you have any social media website that you want to promote?
Sure. I am Dr. Catrina Mitchum. You can call me Katrina. And I am beaming to you from the San Francisco Bay Area in California. My website and social media handle are the same. It's cmlearningdesign.com.
And then what kind of doctor are you?
I have a doctorate in rhetoric, writing, and digital studies.
And then what do you do for your job?
So I do a little bit of everything right now. But I am a learning experience designer. And so what I do is I help, people who have online businesses and are overwhelmed and want to build courses. I help them with doing the planning and figuring out what it's going to look like. And then I also do course audits for folks that have courses that aren't really quite working the way that they anticipated it would work.
So before we move on to another question, the first question, your audio is a little bit static, not like steady. I don't know why, but
Huh.
it's kind of choppy.
Huh. I'm not really sure why. Let me let me see. Yeah, there aren't any really audio settings that I can adjust. It will just let me mute or unmute. How is that any better?
It's still choppy, but let's actually move forward. So let's move on to the first question of this podcast, which is the adversity. So can you tell our audience what was your adversity?
Um, it kind of just everything built on itself, but it started in when I was about 3 4 months postpartum. I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And I was, I had two young kids under three, and I was completing my PhD program. And I'm not sure if the if the audience knows what multiple sclerosis is, but it's an autoimmune disease that attacks your brain and your spinal cord. And so I had like I can't feel anything in my right hand, and sometimes my foot decides not to work, and I forget words, and so that might happen today, like common words that I know. Um, and so it caused a lot of mobility issues. I had optic neuritis in my right eye, and so I couldn't see out of my right eye. And then I proceeded to graduate, eventually graduated, and got into a full time position. Working in higher education, and in higher education it's kind of go 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 all the time, and I thought that I could keep up, and I couldn't keep up, and so I resulted in having another relapse and having to switch medications and falling and multiple times, falling and breaking my arm, falling off of an elliptical, and almost hurting myself. um, and so those were the pieces that the diagnosis was the first piece, and then the inability to do the thing that I had gone to school for so long to train to do, are sort of the pieces that I would call the adversity.
Thank you. Um, so just to let you know, your audio is super choppy. So I apologize, but I don't know if you're using some headset or anything.
I am using a headset. Would it be, do you want me to try a different microphone? My laptop mic does not. It
That's okay.
sounds like my laptop is taking off.
Are you wearing headpiece, like
Yeah,
earpiece?
yeah, I am. Yeah,
Would you try without it and see if it's less choppy? Because it's very hard to understand what you're saying.
sure. Hold on.
Mhm.
How about now?
Keep talking. Yeah,
Can you even hear me now?
yes, it's actually better.
Okay.
So you are mentioning about MS, and then MS is something that people don't really know. I don't know much. I only know a few people that I've heard, but not directly. So you're the first person that I've talked to with MS. How old were you when you were diagnosed with MS, and how was your feeling when doctor said that you had MS?
So I would have been 32, I think. Um, and it was, I mean, it was both a shock and not a shock at the same time, right? Because the symptoms matched. Um, and it was, I mean, it was devastating. There's not really another word for it.
And then you mentioned some of the disability that came with it and then that affected your life. How are you dealing? How is your symptom right now? Is it worsen? Is this something that MS progresses or it goes away? Like, how would you educate other people about MS? Like myself, I don't know how it
Mhm.
works.
Yeah, that's a really good question. There are actually a couple of different varieties. So there's something called relapsing remitting. That is the kind that I have. And so I have things like I have relapses where new symptoms show up or old symptoms get a lot worse. And then things pull back a little bit. So that's the relapse part of it. Then there's progressive MS, and that's when it's just a constant increase in symptoms. A lot of people that have relapsing remitting MS end up getting progressive MS down the road.
And how about your ability to drive and stuff?
I can drive. There have been times where, so something else that causes, it doesn't cause a relapse, but it can cause a flare up, if that makes sense. So we kind of call it a pseudo flare. When you are, or when I am, and lots of other folks are exhausted, sick, or overheated, heat, high temperatures actually cause a lot of things to get worse. Um, Momentarily, like once you cool down, things are better than they were, but those kinds of things make it so like I lose some control over my right leg. I kind of walk around like a drunk person without being able to control it. I start slurring my words, all that kind of thing. If I get overheated or I get sick or overtired.
How is your mental health stage after getting diagnosed with MS, especially to show up and especially after or during getting the PhD program? Like, so a lot of people, so for instance, get diagnosed with cancer or diagnosed with some different diseases that before even you get treatment, that you're mentally like gets like weak and then just like devastated. Like, how do you describe, especially the beginning of the diagnosis, your mental stage?
I ignored it, which is not recommended. Because I was already so busy, right? I was a mom to two young kids. My spouse was gone a lot for work, and um, I was working on a dissertation. I was writing the dissertation at that point. I just put my head down and did and did and did instead of processing things, which came back and bit me, came back and bit me later. But that was how I initially processed it, is that I didn't.
Well, thank you so much for sharing it. Is there any other things that you want to educate other people about MS or your condition or your challenges, like daily challenges that you want to describe?
Yeah, I think, I mean, not my personal daily challenges, because I mean, that's a long, boring list that you don't want to hear. But I think, if you meet someone with MS, recognizing that it is different for everybody. And when they tell you that they're tired or have fatigue, it's a whole other level than you've ever imagined, just because of the way that the body is attacking itself. Um, I think those are probably the two big things. Is it's different for everybody, except for we're all really tired.
Do you know if people in 30s get diagnosed with MS more often than older or younger generation? Is there any data?
Yeah, it's considered a young people's disease, I guess you could say. So people are typically around their 30s, when they're diagnosed, and not for everybody, but oftentimes autoimmune diseases come in in pairs or more. And so a lot of people that have MS are also dealing with other autoimmune diseases as well. Not always, but sometimes.
Well, as a researcher, as a PhD person, like, did you kind of dive into what is MS? Like, why is it what's causing it? Like, did you like deep dive into like understanding of the mechanism of MS?
Absolutely. I think I started to do that before I even had the diagnosis, because it's one of those things where you don't get a diagnosis just from having one symptom. It has to be, you have a symptom and then you have it happen again, right? And so really what MS is your immune system is attacking the protective coating around your spinal cord and your brain, and is doing nerve damage. And so it's not just one instance of that happening, it has to be multiple in order for it to be diagnosed as multiple sclerosis. And that's part of the reason why the illness and the fatigue and the heat make things worse, because you have scar tissue in that protective coating, and those things all make electrical conducting less effective, right? And so signals are not getting where they need to go because of that damage.
Well, thank you so much for describing. So, Katrina, let's move on to the next question, which is a tool that you use to overcome, or tools that you use to overcome. So this is really great part of the podcast, that a lot of guests that came to this podcast really shared personal um, tools that they use to overcome, not like from the internet, not from like the therapist, like a real thing that people use. So what would you say to um, combat the MS everyday challenge? You kind of mentioned about ignoring it. One thing is that, but what are the tools that truly worked for you?
So I had to kind of both accept that it wasn't something that you can overcome, right? This is something I'm going to have for my entire life. There is no cure. But then at the same time, do what I can to prevent it from getting worse. And so for me, that looked like going on medication that is intended to prevent it from getting worse. Doesn't always work, and I've had to switch medications because sometimes medications stop working. And so it's been it's been also being diligent about my health, which for a little while I didn't do, right? I was ignoring things and I jumped into a full-time job and I was working, 80 hours a week by the time I left. And that actually taught me, because I got made myself worse, right? It taught me that I needed to start paying closer attention to my body and what it was telling me. Um, and it made me slow down in ways that I wasn't expecting. So the other thing I would say is I have done extensive amounts of research on the things that I can do, the things that I do have in my control, because so much is not in my control. Um, and asking for help, right? That's not something I've ever been very good at, but knowing that I don't know enough to help with foot drop. Like, I can look up exercises, but I need somebody that knows what they're doing to actually look at how I'm doing the exercise and to fix it if I'm doing it incorrectly, so that we can strengthen the signal between my foot and my brain, or what's left of it. So also acknowledging the places where I needed help and then reaching out to get that help, have been sort of critical to. I haven't fallen in a year, so so that's good. I mean, I feel like it means it's what I've been doing or what I've changed to both accept that this is the way it's going to be, and there are certain things that I can do, and doing those things has been helping.
Is there any like Facebook group or support group or local group for MS that you go to, or maybe online?
Yeah, there's quite a few Facebook groups. Like the MS Society has their own, and there are some organizations that do that provide services and support. One of my favorite groups is actually not run by any organization. The admin or other folks that have MS, and there's two of them. One of them is Adventures in MS, and so we're all at different stages of mobility, but everybody likes to laugh at themselves and each other in that group, and so we use humor sort of as a tool to accept the things that can't actually be overcome, that we just have to deal with. But it's also a place where we can come and like cry to each other, because we know that this group understands it when we say, you know, I'm exhausted, or I don't have any spoons left, or my foot's acting up, or my eye, I'm seeing 8 colors out of my right eye, or like all of these different things that a lot of other folks don't understand. And so it's a really great group.
How about communicating with your family members, children? Like, do you have like open communication? What are the tools that you're using to have a good relationship with despite the MS?
Yeah. When my kids were little, we didn't share about it, because that I was taking medication that I had to self-inject, and like my oldest was, was terrified of shots, and so we just kind of kept it away from them. Now that they're a little bit older, we've told them, what it is, and that sometimes they need to help me with certain things. We have a code word for. So when I get overheated is usually when I have the most difficult time with cognitively, right? So like finding words and things like that. And so words is actually the code word for, like, they need to just stop asking me questions, stop talking, because I need like that extra processing time to put together the string of words that I need to communicate what I need to communicate.
How about work situation, friends and families? Like, how do you advocate yourself?
So I actually had a difficult time advocating for myself before I left my full-time job, because it's a disease that you never actually really know how it's going to affect you, right? So one time it might be I can't see to do grades, or the next time it might be I can't feel my fingers in order to type. Like there's no predicting it, right? And so when I had reached out to my they have disability resource center is where you reach out to get accommodations, and they told me they couldn't help me because they didn't have a concrete thing to give me an accommodation for. Even though I listed, well, these are the things that have happened in the past. And so that made it more difficult. Since I've left, I'm doing consulting and doing things more on my own time and schedule. I have a little bit more control over my day most of the time, and so that helps a lot. I can schedule things around days or times during the day when things kind of wax and wane for me.
How about your like mental health stage? Like how do you like keep your focus and keep showing up? I know you mentioned about like ignoring it, and then I think it's kind of true if you put so much into the negativity or disease. You only have 24 hours, and then how do you utilize that hours that you're functioning, that if you dwell into, unfortunately, those kind of worries and then conditions for like 10 hours a day, then that would be your big chunk of time. So how are you kind of maybe designating the time to be worried, or how are you managing it?
Yeah, I don't designate time to be worried because worry isn't actually ever going to help me. I spend that time trying to navigate out myself out of situations that that might cause an exacerbation. So, you know, a lot of the MS medications are immunosuppressants, and so during COVID, I even after COVID have masked for a very long time, no matter what other people say. So, things like just making sure I'm taking care of myself, like worrying about taking care of myself as opposed to worrying about what's going to happen because it's impossible to predict. Um, and I can only take one day at a time. And so just focusing on one day at a time and what can I do today?
I'm sure your perspective of life has changed prior, before diagnosis of MS, and then after.
A little bit, yeah. I've always been sort of I can't worry too much about tomorrow, which is probably how I got into the predicament of ignoring it in the first place. But it's definitely, I want to say that's probably helped me handle the situation. Is I could never do 5-year plans. That was never something I was good at. And I can't do that now either. So it works out okay.
It is so interesting that you said about 5 years, 10 years plan. Sometimes it's good, but sometimes it has a negative effect. And then I just want to share it with you and then our audience that I've interviewed the survivor of Ukrainian war who got rescued and then came here. And then they had this long term plan before war, but this happened and they lost everything and they left the country. So after that, they said it's just like one day at a time. You never know. So they said they kind of stopped planning for the future. So definitely like one of the tools, especially when the adversity hits really, really hard, that one foot after another, and then one day at a time. I think those are the things that I've heard and I've applied that worked, something that you can control versus something that you don't know and worry.
Yeah. Yeah. And being kind to myself. I think that's the other thing that people, especially people that have been through any kind of adversity, they forget, right? They forget to do it, to give your own self some grace when there is a day that you just can't, because there's going to be days you just can't.
No, I completely agree with you. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. So, Katrina, let's talk about a gift that came from the adversity. So, what would you say a gift that came from your adversity?
I would say, this is going to sound funny, but I would say my health. Interestingly enough, just because before I ran myself into the ground, really, um, and part of that running into the ground was an MS flare or relapse. Um, I hadn't really been taking care of myself, and so every day, no matter what's happening, I make sure I get my exercises in that are going to help prevent me from falling. If my foot does decide it's going to stop working, everything else now is strong enough to at least make me not fall, right? I'm probably still going to trip, but I'm not going to fall, right? And that's the big thing to me, and making sure that I'm eating a diet that's not going to make my body feel worse. And so I'm taking time. I'm making the time, prioritizing the time to take care of myself before I do anything else.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your story. Before you go, would you please give an advice for somebody who may just have gotten diagnosed with MS? What do you think the biggest advice that you can give it to these people?
Uh, Find a group. That's something I wish I had done a lot sooner, because I think it would have helped. Um, Definitely find, and it doesn't have to be like a big group of people, right? The first person that I met or talked to that had MS, it was one person, and she had also left higher education for similar reasons. And that was huge. That's what inspired me to go find these other groups that I'm in now that really help with the day to day. Even if it's just like I laugh really, really hard at them or with them, finding a group, because they're there. They've been there. They will be there, and really understand what you're going through.
Well, thank you very much again for coming to A Gift from Adversity today.
Of course, thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you to our audience for checking out A Gift from Adversity. Please share this episode, and then we have great guests coming up. So, see you next time.